Are we missing the point with phishing tests? We know attackers will just craft better messages to get clicks. So how can we make our own testing more meaningful?
You're listening to Defense in Depth.
Welcome to Defense in Depth. My name is David Spark. I'm the producer of the CISO series. And joining me for this very episode, you loved him since he was, I've mentioned this before, since he was a child actor. And now he's become a CISO. We're so excited to see him grow up. And you know what I think most I enjoy, Jeff, is you didn't go the path of the other child actors. You kept it together. I'm very proud of you.
Yeah, when I got my first Academy Award, it kept me humble. I didn't let it change me. So
I appreciate.
Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. I don't know what podcast this is now.
It is actually a cybersecurity podcast. Hang tight. You've been on it before, Jeff.
All right.
Our sponsor for today's episode is Concentric AI. Find and protect your data with Concentric AI. We're going to talk about exactly how they do that a little bit later in the show. Jeff, phishing tests in and of themselves don't tell us much. You either make them too obvious to get a good response rate or devious enough to say gotcha to your employees, as Mike Johnson, CISO of Rivian and CISO Series podcast co-host, said on LinkedIn. Now, Mike has many times mentioned that he is not a fan of phishing tests. So the tests themselves, he believes, aren't worth much. So I'm going to want to know your opinion as we talk about this, but how do we start answering the what happens next after a phishing message rather than just assigning a pass-fail grade and make the person take more, awareness training?
I think this is a great way to think about it. It shouldn't be how do we decide whether employees are any good or not based on the phishing training, but really what do we do with this information? And I think that is really the crux of where we're at with this. And I think we got a great guest to have a conversation about it today.
And I think also the question is, do we value that information? Is there value in that information from a phishing test, which there is debate on that. And that is the point of this episode. So I'm excited about our guest. He is the VP CISO of Westat, none other than Dennis Pickett. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to talk about the topic. It is always on people's minds. It's something that's happening more and more these days. And the more we discuss it and learn about it and make it more effective, the better we're all going to be.
What aspects haven't been considered?
Rohit Bolani said, quote, "Abandon viewing phishing simulations as tests. They are immersive education opportunities. The goal shouldn't be to focus on the organization's click rate or, worse still, any one person's, but rather the organization's resilience as measured by the ratio of the number of employees that report the email as suspect versus those that take the bait." Now, driving that reporting culture can be the difference between an attack turning into an infection versus a full-blown breach. And we hear that a lot, as well as that it's more important about the reporting rather than you clicked on it, although they don't want you clicking on it. Jonathan Waldrop, CISO over at the Weather Company, said, quote, "The best way to protect against phishing attacks is to give your employee base clear guidance on how to escalate when they do accidentally click. And to be clear, nobody should be fired for admitting that they made a mistake. If your security strategy relies on one person not clicking, you are doomed to fail." And that, I think that very last line is key, because if that's your security program, you haven't built that good of a security program, have you, Jeff?
No, not at all. I think Jonathan hits the nail on the head, although I think he gets there in a roundabout way. And here's where I think it's really important to zero in. The best way to protect against phishing attacks is to use either phishing-resistant credentials to transition everybody to passkeys or passwordless or something that is very difficult to phish, or really build a bunch of automation either into the browser, into your desktop, whatever, that can detect and block phishing attacks. You have to just attack this methodically and mechanically. It is not hoping that somebody's going to report a link. Now, if your organization doesn't have the budget for, or just is, at a different point in their maturity journey along the journey of security, where you don't have this kind of automation or you can't roll out phishing-resistant credentials, yes, phishing tests are fantastic. They're very useful. But I think both of these commenters make a great point that they're not useful in the sense of you can use them as a punitive tool against your users. They're useful to just understand, like, where do you have more opportunities to help people understand where to report things? Where, is your tooling working? What's going on? And I think that's the key. It's not about your users. It's about what you can do for them.
Very good point. All right. Dennis, your take on this. Where do you see the value? And do you think both Rohit and Jonathan set it up well here?
They definitely set it up well, and they mentioned a few things I think are very important. One of the things talked about was pass-fail and punitive measures, and I totally agree. You can't just have phishing testing as a pass-fail event and look at your employees like you are bad. You clicked on something once, you clicked on something again. That's a bad thing. You need to use it to derive data and information from your employees, from your organization, and see where you need to be doing better. Because not all phishing messages are equal. You can run a simple phishing message that says, please click this link versus one that says you have a package waiting, please click this link. And you'll get vastly different click rates. Understanding why things are happening and which kinds of things your employees are more susceptible to, and then reacting to that, I feel, is an excellent tool to have in the toolbox. We can't always expect to be able to block things at the perimeter. It's the whole defense in depth concept that the podcast is named after. You have to assume at some point something is going to get through, and what can you do about it then?
Why are we blaming users?
Gadi Evron of Gnostic said, quote, "Phish tests are measurable, and I'd like to see them used for risk scoring of users with associated permissions rather than, quote, send to a website for a learning experience. 4% will always click. Track those who read your intentional emails, attend your webinars, and care about security. They are natural champions for the cause and act as the human sensors who will report issues you want to know about. The human detection layer, if you like." David Jones of RX Benefit said, quote, "Don't condemn the ones that click, but celebrate the ones that report them." All right. So this is something that we referenced, that this is the thing that we want, is more reporting. So is phishing tests the best way to go about reporting, Dennis? Or is there maybe a different way? Or like, how do you sort of, I guess, build that reporting muscle, if you will?
Sure. I'm always in favor of building the better mousetrap, but phishing is what we have now, and it's what a lot of the tools center around. So, we try to use them as effectively as we can. At Westat, we've implemented a phish alert button. I know many companies have done such a thing, but it's one way you can track that reporting rate, and you can see how effective your education has been and get an idea of how many people are trying to help there.
Let me pause you there. So you said a phish alert button. So like in people's inbox, there is a very clear button that says, I think this is maybe a phish. So it's like ever present and someone could click on it at any given time.
Yes, exactly right. It's even got a little fish hook on there, so it's very recognizable at the icon. And we've done a lot of employee user training around this, even asking them to click it on a sample test message so they kind of get the hang of it. And it's there to do a couple of things. One, it's to sort of crowdsource reporting, right? If enough people click on something, it's going to automatically be quarantined until it is investigated. And then we add some automation behind that can investigate those emails, because these are the ones that have gotten through. Right. These are the ones that have ended up in the user's inbox. And now we're relying on them in our layer of defense to report things that we can take action on. So if enough people report a particular message, we get flagged and somebody on the security team does an investigation. And we have automated tools where we can, but those automated tools aren't perfect. And sometimes they can't make a clear determination. And we have a process for doing investigations after that. Sometimes the users don't care. They report something. It's not something they're concerned about. Other times it looks like something they might need to open or an attachment they might need for business purposes, and they're just not sure.
And one of the things that we've heard that is valuable is that looping back, like, hey, because you reported that email, we investigated and we discovered this. So they realized there was some value to it. Do you do something like this?
Absolutely. They want that feedback. In fact, when we first started this, we weren't providing that. And we had users following up with us saying, whatever happened to that thing, I reported. And that's when we realized, you know what, it's not only just a good practice to let them know, but that reward, that positive feedback and the thank you for having done that and the results of that investigation cause them to want to do that more.
That's a good point. Now, I'm going to repeat a story that I've mentioned before, and I'm going to throw this to you, Jeff, in just a second. Is actually a good friend of mine she works in HR for a company. They actually had to let someone go because they repeatedly kept failing phishing tests. Now, I know everyone I've mentioned this to, just they're squeamish. Andy Ellis was horrified by this. Everyone's, but now here's the thing that was weird. This guy was a mechanic. He was not, a knowledge worker. He did not work on the computer. He used his computer very, very little. But everyone was required to take this, security awareness. As many times as they tried and as many times as they trained him, this guy just kept repeatedly failing, and they had to let him go. First of all, have you ever heard of a story like this before? And B, just the way you're shaking your head, it sounds like you're completely and utterly horrified, Jeff. Yes.
No, that's the stupidest thing I could imagine. You don't look, if you're running a business, regardless of what the business is, you are not hiring people with the requirement that they know how to identify phishing emails. And I hate to just come out too hard against this, but I'll use this as a performative example of where security fails the business, right? Our job as security professionals is to support and accelerate and enhance the success of the business by de-risking it, by helping, build automation, by helping it win and be successful. You're not helping the business if you construct a mindset that everyone needs this basic security skill, and if they don't have it, they should be fired, right? If I'm running an F1 team, I'm probably hiring, engineers that know how to build specific aerodynamic tools or whatever. If I'm running an AI program, I'm looking for people that have very specific skill sets. And whether or not they can identify a phishing email is not relative to the value that they're bringing to the organization. You shouldn't be punishing them. What you should be doing is investing any of that time and energy in doing better at detecting and preventing or responding when somebody does click on it. Because the one thing you can predict with absolute certainty is that people will click on something they're not supposed to. There is nothing you can do to stop that.
So let me go back to the earlier question that I was asking Dennis is, what do you think is the best mechanism or the best way to help people flex that muscle of being aware to phishing in general, if it's not doing phishing tests?
Yeah, I think you can do phishing tests, but I think the way you should think about them is not as part of somebody's performance as an employee, but you think about them as two things primarily, or the way I think about them at least, is one, as a data point to your detection and your tooling, like, is it easy for people to report these? Does your tooling automatically find them? Blah, blah, blah. The other part of it is, how are you building incentives for a more security positive culture? And one of the things you can do with phishing tests and actual phishing campaigns is incentivize people that report them and celebrate them as champions. One of the things we did at another company I worked for is we had buttons and stickers and T-shirts. And it was like, if there was a real phishing campaign and you were the first person or one of the first couple of people to report it, we would give you a T-shirt and people would wear them with pride. It would be like, I saved, and it said the company name. And people, I'll tell you one thing people really are is competitive. And they were like, I want to find that next time. And that is driving positive cultural change in your organization without it having to be punitive.
Before I go on any further, I do want to tell you about our absolutely spectacular brand new sponsor, and that is Concentric AI. So as the leader in AI-driven data security posture management, or DSPM, Concentric AI understands that Gen AI tools like Microsoft Copilot, super duper popular, well, those are generating new data protection challenges that were just unheard of not that long ago. So that's why they've developed a cutting-edge solution designed to protect your most sensitive data, no matter where it resides, on premises, in the cloud, or within SaaS applications. So today's data protection solutions need to go beyond just identifying risks. Concentric AI was designed to do more. It proactively and automatically discovers, classifies, and remediates at-risk data across your entire organization. Plus, it makes sure that any content generated or accessed by Copilot remains protected from unauthorized access or accidental exposure. Now, whether it's structured or unstructured data, Concentric AI adapts to your unique environment, providing the intelligence and the oversight you need to stay compliant and secure. So by integrating seamlessly with Microsoft Copilot, Concentric AI empowers your organization to harness the full potential of AI technologies without compromising on security. You can trust Concentric AI to keep your data safe so you can focus on innovation, growth, and success. So go ahead, visit Concentric AI today. Let me give you the spelling. That's CONCENTRIC.ai. Go there to discover how you can protect your PII, your PHI, and your intellectual property with ease.
What's the optimal approach?
Thomas August of Ultimate Health Services said, quote, I think of phishing testing as a routine practice of fundamentals, much like a pro basketball player will shoot hundreds of free throws a day. I think that drilling workforce members on basic fundamentals is essential. You're not trying to trick them, just practice the fundamentals so that it becomes second nature. Interesting take. Jason Haynick of Arctic Wolf said, quote, we are finally accepting that humans aren't the last layer of defense. Sure, they may be a link in the chain, but often the weakest link is under the most load. And by the way, I'm going to just take it aside. This is something that we've heard is that people aren't the weakest link, but they're the number one attack vector. All right. Going back to Jason's quote here, in my career, I've done live hacking demonstrations that showed users what happened, quote, after the click and was far more engaging and effective than my phishing sim program was. Let's accept the fact that users will click just like users will plug in a USB, just like users will lose devices, and build a support system around those behaviors. By the way, I find both of these interesting. Thomas says, look, it's like working out. That's why we do phishing tests. And Jason says, look, they're a good layer of defense. They're not the best layer, but they are a good layer. And people are fallible. It's part of their makeup. Let's build defenses to it. What say you on this, Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, I like both those points, and I think they're complementary as opposed to contradictive. I think that practicing the fundamentals is important, and having your user base be more aware of these kinds of things does not hurt anything. You could argue is the cost, not just in terms of the tools you use, but the user's time to take the training and to do the testing and things like that. Does that provide the value for what you're looking for? But let's assume for the moment that it does, then I think why not have these things in place? Why not have your users practice these fundamentals? It's, I think, an earlier quote talked about a culture shift that you're driving within the organization. That's just more awareness. You know, TSA has their famous motto, if you see something, say something. And it took years before that became something that when you walk into an airport, if you see an unattended bag, you are going to remember that saying and go, I got to tell someone about this. Why not have people trained with that kind of awareness and that kind of reaction?
In your program, Jeff, you don't see people as weakest link, but you realize people are human and we all make mistakes. Jeff, I believe you've made a mistake in your life before, yes?
Never. I have never made a mistake. I think that's what my wife keeps saying. It could be the opposite of that. Yeah, look, people are human, and not only do they regularly make mistakes, we're talking about the intersection here of most people whose jobs is something else having to learn a skill, which is, effectively becoming a part-time security person. They are not going to get it right most of the time. And frankly, it is, it is really easy to trick people. The phishing emails out there are really, really good, and people are just humans. They will fall for tricks when you lie to them. So while I think it's absolutely valid to make these tests part of life and to sort of see and get the data about, what percentage of your user base or your user population is falling for these, and using that information to inform decisions you make about purchasing or priorities or more training, we should just be really clear. This is not a performance evaluation tool. You should not be judging, grading, or deciding people's fate based on how they perform on one of these.
What's the best tool for the job?
Sunday McDixon Samuel, a great name, of SMSAM Systems said, quote, I'd rather take the pressure off the employees by implementing proactive security controls that prevents the phishing emails from getting in the first instance. Isolate all web contents to the network or work from home, While phishing awareness training is great, it does put unnecessary pressure on employees. Implementing DMARC to reject phase prevent most phishing mails from getting in. Additionally, implementing API-based ESG prevents over 95% of any time of phishing getting in. So, by the way, I think most of us, God willing, are doing the things that Sunday is saying right here. Yes, Jeff? I would hope.
I think, again, I sort of talked about this at the top of the show. I think this is where the journey of security takes you at the higher end of the maturity curve to fight phishing, right? You're going to implement these things in your email. You're going to implement strict DMARC rules. You're going to build, buy, or borrow automation. You're going to implement very phishing resistant credentials and ways to manage identities. Like, yes, this is where you're all going. And frankly, this is where your energy and your investment should go. If you're spending money on phishing testing, it should be to validate that doing this is a positive force for your organization.
Agreed. But I think it's previously with Jason's comment, it's saying like, they're weak chain, but it's a good link. And Dennis, you were just saying, look, this is all part of defense in depth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the quote you were just reading, they said, the goal should be to prevent it from coming in at all. And I think we can all agree that is something we would love to have happen, but that's just not the reality these days with the tools at our disposal because things are still getting through. And I think some of this is context. If it gets through to a regular user, that's one thing. If it gets through to somebody in your finance department who's sending money and payments out because they think the messages they're getting are from legitimate people within your organization, that's a much bigger risk and a much bigger problem.
All right. I want to wrap up this episode just stating our sort of opinions on the value of phish testing and to what level is it useful, to what level is it not useful, and if it's not phish simulations, what other mechanism would you sort of rely on more? I will start with you, Jeff.
There's definitely some value to phishing simulation. If for nothing else, if you've already implemented every tool, technology, and mature process you can.
Like Sunday pointed out.
Yeah, exactly. To just understand, what the problem still looks like and, your users' behaviors and what, if anything, you can do to continuously improve. And if you haven't made all those investments, I think it's still really valuable to understand what kind of behaviors you've got in your user population. But I think it's just really useful to you as a security program, not necessarily useful to HR.
By the way, I'm glad you brought that up at the end because that's a really good point to make is this gives you, the whole point of being a security professional is to understand your environment. Your humans are part of your environment and how they are behaving is part of your understanding of your environment. So these phish testings are not really should be designed for who's failing and not failing and who's reporting, not reporting, but more of how does my community behave on these kinds of different tests? All right, I throw it to you. Where do you stand on the value of phishing simulations and other possible solutions, Dennis?
Sure. Now, if we weren't doing these phishing testings or we thought they weren't effective, we should be relying on other layers of protection that we should be doing as well. We talked about between multi-factor and passphrases and things, but that's one kind of phishing, where somebody's trying to capture credentials from a bad link. I mentioned a moment ago about, if your finance department gets something that says, please make a payment and everything looks perfectly legitimate, you still need some other measure, a password, a code, a phrase. Even if you're getting a call or even these days a video call that appears to be for people within your organization, you can't always trust those things anymore. So, the whole trust but verify, you've got to, I think you need to be relying on other measures you should have in place already. These should be additional protections so that if credentials are lost, nobody else can actually use them because they're not getting the whole part of the credential. Or if somebody's requesting a payment to be made, you're not sending that out right away because there's another measure to verify that this is actually an authorized request.
Two keys that have to be turned at the same time, essentially. From different, that it can't be one person stretching their arms, if you will.
Yes.
Excellent. This was awesome. All right. Now we've come to the point of the recording where I ask you, our guest, Dennis, which of these quotes was your favorite and why?
I want to call it Rui Alani's quote about driving culture change within the organization because I think the phishing tests are more than just as we said, a pass-fail. Did this user do this or not? It's about getting your organization more focused on security and being more aware that not everything is going to be something you should be trusting. You should have extra measures in place. You should be verifying that what's happening and what you're reading and seeing is real.
All right, Jeff, your favorite quote and why?
I'm going to go with David Jones from RX Benefits, who said exactly what's always in my brain, which is don't condemn the ones that click. Celebrate the ones that report the emails. And I think...
Give them a T-shirt.
Give them a T-shirt, a button, a well-written, handwritten note, whatever it might be, but let people know that reporting it is the thing you're really valuing. You're not really looking for people that missed it, but you're celebrating the people that caught it.
And that dovetails very nicely to what Dennis said about culture change. And that is all about building up that sort of positive culture around security. Well, that brings us to the very end of this very episode. I want to thank, first, our sponsor of this episode, which is Concentric AI. Find and protect your data with Concentric AI. If you've got Microsoft Copilot in your environment, you owe it to yourself to take a look at Concentric AI. Just go to their website, concentric.ai. That's concentric.ai. Dennis, I will let you have the very last word. Thank you so much, Jeff, as always. And Dennis, first of all, I want to ask, at Westat, are you hiring over there?
We are often hiring. I don't know about necessarily this moment, but if anybody's interested, you can always go to the career pages at westat.com to see what's posted and if there might be something that is a fit for you.
And if it's something in security, is it appropriate if someone reaches out to you directly?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay, so the link to his LinkedIn page will be on the blog post for this episode, so you can follow up with him as well. Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you to our audience. We greatly appreciate your contributions and listening to Defense in Depth.
We've reached the end of Defense in Depth. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss yet another hot topic in cybersecurity. This show thrives on your contributions. Please write a review, leave a comment on LinkedIn or on our site, CISOseries.com, where you'll also see plenty of ways to participate, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@CISOseries.com. Thank you for listening to Defense in Depth.